The German officer laughed in front of hundreds of prisoners and called General Patton a liar while holding a folded document above his head. But the laughter vanished when Patton calmly ordered a truck brought into the yard and told every man to keep watching for the next 5 minutes, because something inside that truck was about to prove that one of them had been lying for months, and Patton already knew exactly who it was. The argument began on a cold afternoon inside Camp Ashford, where several hundred German prisoners stood in formation while American guards unloaded supply trucks near the administration building. General George Patton had arrived unexpectedly to inspect conditions inside the camp after receiving reports that prisoner complaints were increasing, and most of the officers expected a short visit followed by a speech. Instead, the inspection stopped when Captain Wilhelm Krantz stepped out of the prisoner ranks carrying a folded document and demanded permission to address the American commander directly. The request should have been denied immediately, but Patton motioned for the guards to let the officer speak. Krantz walked forward with unusual confidence and claimed that American officials had broken promises made during an earlier prisoner transfer. He insisted that several German prisoners had disappeared after being moved from another holding facility and argued that the Americans were hiding the truth. The document in his hand appeared to support the accusation because it contained names, dates, and transfer numbers copied from official camp records. Patton took the paper, read it carefully, and returned it without visible emotion. The prisoners expected an argument, yet Patton simply asked where the document had come from. Krantz answered that it had been assembled from records available throughout the camp and claimed that the evidence proved American officers were lying. Several prisoners nodded, and the mood inside the yard shifted quickly because the accusation touched a subject that already worried many men who had lost contact with friends during chaotic wartime transfers. Instead of defending the administration, Patton asked one short question about a specific transfer number written near the bottom of the page. Krantz answered immediately, explaining that the number belonged to a prisoner supposedly moved 3 weeks earlier. Patton then asked about a second number, and again Krantz answered without hesitation. The speed of the replies caught the attention of several guards because the officers seemed to know the records better than many clerks working inside the office. The inspection changed direction when Patton requested every transfer document connected to the list. Clerks carried boxes of records into the yard while prisoners watched from behind the wire. Krantz appeared pleased because each delay strengthened his accusation. He told nearby prisoners that Americans feared public scrutiny and suggested the records would expose even more missing men. By the time the boxes arrived, dozens of prisoners had gathered close enough to hear every exchange. Patton opened the first box and reviewed several files while standing beside a folding table. He compared names, dates, and signatures without raising his voice, then asked the camp records officer whether any files had been altered recently. The officer answered no. Krantz immediately laughed and called the response dishonest. Several prisoners joined the laughter, believing the German officer had trapped the Americans in a contradiction they could not explain. That was the moment Patton finally reacted. He turned toward Krantz and said the records were not the problem. The problem was that someone inside the camp had been rewriting information before the files ever reached the office. The statement silenced the laughter because it shifted suspicion away from the Americans and directly toward the prisoner population. Krantz answered by calling Patton a liar in front of everyone. The words echoed across the yard. Several guards stepped forward, but Patton stopped them with a raised hand. He did not threaten Krantz, order punishment, or end the discussion. Instead, he pointed toward the motor pool and instructed a sergeant to bring a specific truck to the yard immediately. The order confused nearly everyone present because the vehicle had arrived only that morning and had not yet been unloaded. While the truck crossed the camp, Patton continued examining records. Krantz maintained his confidence and repeated that American officials were hiding the truth. The prisoners listened carefully because the officer sounded certain, and certainty carried enormous weight inside a camp filled with rumors. Yet Patton showed no sign of concern. He appeared to be waiting for something rather than searching for it. 5 minutes later, the truck rolled into the center of the yard. Patton ordered the rear doors opened. Inside sat 6 wooden crates recovered from a storage building outside another former prisoner facility, and each crate contained property records, transport logs, and confiscated documents that had never been delivered to Camp Ashford. Patton selected one file from the nearest crate, opened it in front of the prisoners, and revealed a signature that appeared repeatedly throughout the missing records. The signature belonged to Captain Wilhelm Krantz. Subscribe for more forgotten German POW stories like this one. The revelation should have ended the argument immediately, but instead it made the situation far more dangerous. Every prisoner in the yard turned toward Krantz at once, and for the first time since the confrontation began, the German officer looked genuinely surprised. He recovered quickly and claimed the signature had been forged, arguing that anyone could copy a name onto a transport form. Several prisoners nodded again because the explanation sounded possible, and Patton seemed to expect exactly that response. Rather than argue, Patton ordered the remaining crates opened. Guards carried bundles of files onto the tables while clerks arranged them in rows. One by one, transport records from different camps were placed beside each other. The names changed, the dates changed, and the locations changed. Yet the same signature appeared again and again whenever a prisoner supposedly vanished from the official transfer chain. The pattern was impossible to miss, but Krantz still refused to retreat. He claimed the documents had been collected by incompetent clerks who misunderstood wartime procedures. Then he pointed towards several missing signatures and argued that the records were incomplete. Patton agreed immediately, which confused everyone present. The general calmly stated that the files were incomplete because someone had removed portions of them before they reached American custody. Krantz smiled for the first time since the crates arrived because he believed the missing pages protected him. Patton then ordered another truck into the yard. The second vehicle carried material recovered only 2 days earlier from an abandoned administrative building. Inside were filing cabinets, damaged ledgers, and several sealed boxes that had not yet been examined publicly. Prisoners stretched their necks to see what was happening while guards unloaded the contents beside the first truck. The camp no longer looked like an inspection. It looked like a courtroom built in the open air. A records specialist opened one of the sealed boxes and removed a ledger covered in dust. The book contained duplicate transport entries written by German administrators during the final months of the war. Patton handed it to the interpreter and instructed him to read several passages aloud. Each entry listed a prisoner movement, the officer responsible, and any changes made afterward. The name Krantz appeared repeatedly beside corrections that should never have existed. The atmosphere changed again when one former German clerk stepped forward voluntarily. He had remained silent throughout the confrontation, but after seeing the ledger, he requested permission to speak. Patton granted it immediately. The clerk identified several handwriting samples and explained that Krantz had supervised emergency prisoner movements during the retreat. According to him, official records were often rewritten after transfers had already occurred. Krantz attacked the witness instantly. He accused the clerk of seeking favor from the Americans and claimed the testimony was worthless. The clerk responded by identifying details inside the ledger that only someone who worked in the office could know. He described damaged pages, missing stamps, and filing errors before investigators even opened those sections. Every correct prediction strengthened his credibility while weakening Krantz's position. The escalation became explosive when another prisoner requested permission to speak. This man had never met the clerk and belonged to a different unit entirely. Yet he described being reassigned under paperwork signed by Krantz shortly before surrender. His transfer destination listed one camp, while the transport truck delivered him somewhere completely different. Several prisoners immediately recognized similar experiences and began shouting from different parts of the yard. Patton ordered silence and demanded names. Within minutes, Guards and clerks were recording statements from prisoners who had never spoken to each other before. Each account revealed a different inconsistency, but all roads led back to the same officer. Some described altered transfer numbers. Others remembered duplicate forms. Several recalled prisoners disappearing from manifests during the final weeks of the war. None of the stories proved a crime by themselves, yet together they formed a pattern impossible to ignore. Krantz understood the danger before anyone else. For the first time, he stopped attacking witnesses and started watching the evidence tables instead. Patton noticed the change immediately. The general had seen countless men defend themselves, but only guilty men stopped arguing and began calculating. Krantz's eyes moved constantly across the files as though searching for one specific document among hundreds. Patton followed his gaze. Then he quietly instructed a guard to retrieve a folder from the bottom crate. The moment the folder appeared, Krantz went pale. Whatever sat inside that file frightened him far more than the witnesses, the ledgers, or the signatures. And Patton knew it. The folder was carried to Patton by a young clerk who did not understand why every officer near the table suddenly leaned forward. Its cover was stained with water, and one corner had been burned, but the red pencil mark across the front remained visible enough for the interpreter to read the note written above the file number. It was not a transfer record. It was a correction file, the kind used when an earlier entry had to be replaced before it reached permanent storage. Patton opened it slowly and removed a single page covered with names, dates, and 2 columns of numbers. The first column matched transport records Krantz had used in his accusation against the Americans. The second column showed where those same prisoners had actually been sent before the records were changed. Several men on the list had not disappeared after reaching American custody. They had vanished earlier, during movements supervised by German officers before surrender. The major consequence struck the yard with visible force. Prisoners who had spent hours believing Krantz was exposing American lies now realized his accusation had been built from records he helped distort. The missing men were real, the confusion was real, and the grief in the camp was real, but Krantz had aimed it at the wrong target to protect himself. Patton ordered the correction file placed on the table beside the document Krantz had waved in his hand. Krantz tried to recover by claiming he had signed forms under pressure and could not be responsible for what happened after convoys left his office. The former clerk stepped forward again and contradicted him before the interpreter finished. He said Krantz did not merely sign forms. He ordered certain names removed, replaced destinations, and told clerks that headquarters wanted clean files before the Americans captured the records. Patton ordered the clerk's statement written immediately, then sent guards to search Krantz's assigned barrack. Krantz shouted that the search violated officer privilege, but Patton ignored the protest and instructed the guards to look specifically for writing tools, carbon sheets, and any paper bearing transfer numbers. The search was no longer about proving Krantz had lied once in the yard. It was about proving how he had built the lie. The search team returned with a shaving kit, a hidden pencil stub, and several slips of paper folded beneath the lining of a spare coat. One slip contained the same transfer numbers Krantz had used in his accusation, but beside them were short notes written in German: blame reception, blame convoy confusion, demand public answer. The notes revealed that Krantz had prepared the confrontation before Patton arrived. The consequence widened beyond Krantz when 2 prisoner leaders were found carrying copies of the same accusations in their boots. They had been instructed to spread the story across 3 barracks after the inspection, ensuring that every missing prisoner would be blamed on the Americans by nightfall. Patton ordered the copies displayed in the yard, and the accusation that had begun as a bold challenge started to look like an organized campaign. One prisoner in the rear line suddenly shouted that his brother's name was on the correction file. Guards moved to hold him back, but Patton ordered them to let the man come forward under escort. The prisoner identified the name, the date, and the original convoy, then confirmed that Krantz had personally told families within the prisoner population that the Americans had lost those men after transfer. The man did not attack Krantz. He only asked him where his brother had really gone. Krantz had no answer that could survive the file on the table. He looked toward the barracks, then toward the open gate, then toward the prisoners who had believed him minutes earlier. Patton saw the calculation return to his face and ordered every exit from the yard secured. The German officer who had called him a liar was no longer trying to win an argument. He was looking for a way to keep the last proof from reaching the investigators. The major reversal began when the prisoner who had identified his brother stepped away from the evidence table and pointed toward the camp chapel, not toward Krantz. He said his brother had once carried a small notebook with witness names, and that Krantz had taken it during a night transfer. But the notebook had later reappeared in the hands of a quiet German medic who worked near the chapel storage room. Patton ordered the medic brought forward, and Krantz suddenly shouted for the first time without control. The medic tried to deny everything, but his hands shook when the guards asked for his satchel. Inside were bandage rolls, medical cards, and a folded cloth packet tied with surgical thread. Patton ordered the packet opened on the table. It contained a notebook no larger than a wallet, and on its first page was the name of the missing brother, followed by a date, a truck number, and a note saying that Krantz had ordered a destination change after the convoy had already been loaded. The reversal changed the case completely. Until that moment, Krantz looked like a man who had altered records to hide administrative failures. The notebook showed something more deliberate. Certain prisoners had been moved away because they had seen falsified transfers, stolen property, or abandoned wounded men during retreat. Krantz had not merely cleaned paperwork after chaos. He had directed men out of the record because they knew too much. Patton ordered the notebook read aloud only far enough to confirm the pattern, then stopped before the yard turned into a riot. Several prisoners surged forward, but American guards formed a line and held them back without striking anyone. Patton understood that Krantz's lie had weaponized grief, and if the truth exploded uncontrolled, witnesses could be harmed before they finished speaking. Krantz made his final attempt to reverse the reversal. He accused the medic of forging the notebook to save himself, then claimed the missing brother had been moved under orders from a higher German command. Patton asked for the higher order. Krantz said it had been destroyed. The medic then pointed to the chapel stove and said the order had not been destroyed because Krantz had hidden torn pieces inside a tin of candle wax before evacuation. The chapel storage room was opened under guard. Inside, behind stacked tin boards and broken benches, the guards found a metal tin packed with wax shavings. Melted into the bottom were scraps of thin paper, preserved badly but still readable in fragments. The fragments did not carry a higher command signature. They carried Krantz's initials and a list of men marked for quiet correction, including the missing brother and 2 American prisoners whose names appeared in the first folder. The reversal struck Krantz harder than the crates had. The man who had accused Patton of lying had not been defending missing prisoners. He had been using their absence as cover for a system he helped create. Patton ordered Krantz removed from the officer line and placed beside the evidence table under direct guard, where every witness could identify him without his followers surrounding them. Then the final turn came from the German medic. He admitted that one man from the notebook might still be alive because his transport had been delayed by a damaged axle before surrender. The man had been left at an abandoned farm depot with other sick prisoners, and Krantz had ordered the location removed from the corrected records. Patton no longer needed only documents. He needed a rescue before the last living proof disappeared. The final irreversible event began when Patton sent a fast patrol to the abandoned farm depot with the medic, the former clerk, and 2 American MPs in the lead vehicle. Krantz was forced to ride in the second truck under guard, not because Patton trusted him, but because every road marker, barn number, and transfer detail had to be confirmed in front of the man who had tried to erase them. The convoy left the camp yard while prisoners watched in silence, and the evidence table remained guarded behind them. The depot stood behind a line of broken trees, with its gate hanging loose and its storage sheds half empty. At first, the place looked abandoned, but the medic pointed to fresh cloth tied around a pump handle. Patton's patrol moved quickly across the yard and found a cellar door hidden beneath straw mats inside the main barn. When the door opened, 2 sick German prisoners and 1 wounded American were found alive below, weak, dehydrated, and still carrying old transfer tags that matched the notebook. The wounded American identified the missing brothers' convoy and confirmed that Krantz had visited the depot before the records changed. He had watched Krantz remove pages from a transport ledger and tell a guard that men without clean paperwork would become no one's responsibility. The statement was taken immediately, and Krantz stood close enough to hear every word. This time he did not call anyone a liar. The patrol searched the depot office and found the original ledger hidden behind a loose wall panel. Its entries matched the notebook, the correction file, and the scraps from the chapel tin. The chain was complete: original movement, altered record, public accusation, hidden witness list, and living survivors. Patton ordered the ledger wrapped, sealed, and carried back by a separate guard so no single accident could destroy the entire case. Back at the camp, the rescued men were brought through the yard before sunset. The prisoner who had asked about his brother saw the sick man from the same convoy and learned where his brother had last been recorded. He did not receive the answer he wanted, but he received the first honest answer anyone had given him. That mattered more than Krantz understood, because lies had kept the camp angry, while truth gave grief a direction. Patton then ordered every piece of evidence placed on the tables in sequence. Krantz's accusation document came first, then the correction file, the hidden notes from his coat, the notebook, the chapel fragments, the depot ledger, and the statements from the rescued men. The prisoners filed past slowly, guarded but allowed to see enough to understand the structure of the lie. No speech could have damaged Krantz more than that line of objects. Krantz was brought to the front of the yard after the last witness signed. Patton did not strike him, humiliate him for entertainment, or answer the insult with another insult. He ordered Krantz formally removed from the prisoner officer council, isolated from witness groups, and held for investigation into falsified records and witness intimidation. The punishment was not loud, but it took away the only weapon Krantz had left: control over what other men believed. The irreversible event came when Patton ordered the corrected transfer board posted at the camp office and guarded overnight. Every missing name connected to Krantz's documents was rewritten under review, every known location added, and every uncertain status marked honestly instead of hidden behind false certainty. Krantz had called Patton a liar in front of hundreds of men, but by nightfall his own lie was nailed to a board where every prisoner could watch it collapse line by line. The next morning, the camp yard was quieter than it had been during the accusation. Krantz remained behind a separate fence while clerks copied the corrected records, and the prisoner who had asked about his brother stood near the board reading the first truthful entry he had ever received. Patton passed the table without looking at Krantz and handed the depot ledger to the investigator. The insult had lasted only seconds, but the proof it forced into the open changed every name Krantz had tried to bury. Most people know how World War II ended. Very few know what happened inside these prison camps. Subscribe for more untold WW2 stories.